on to week 13 and the month of December. What's up, Rob?
What's up, man? How you doing?
I'm good, man. I'm good. You get all decorated for Christmas yet?
We did. We got the Christmas spirit flowing around here. Starting to really feel it. Went to a Radio City show the other night to kick off the Christmas season.
Oh, yeah?
Feeling good, man. Yeah. A little Sunday night. Skipped Sunday night football and went to check out some Radio City performance. It was really cool. Getting into the season and we're almost there, man. So how you been? I mean, like how you feeling about this season? Like it's fun just to be in the Christmas season, but it's also like the nitty gritty of like the end of the season, NFL. You find out who's for real, like who's gonna make the playoffs. But even though it's really tight right now, so it's a fun time
Yeah.
of year.
Yeah, it really is because you kind of come down to that December stretch. And I mean, there's a ton of football left to play. I mean, you got coming into week 13, I mean, you still got like 5, 6 weeks of football left. So, um, I always enjoy it because there's definitely some teams that are just totally eliminated. They're just garbage, kind of those bottom 6 or 7 teams. But there really are several teams that can make a run here down the stretch. And what's fun about talking about it from this standpoint is, fantasy is kind of winding down. You're kind of either in the playoffs or you're not. And most of that content at this point is kind of, been discussed. You kind of know who the players are, who the start sits are and everything, who the matchups are. But for us, like this is kind of really where it gets interesting because we're coming down the stretch and kind of gearing up for playoff football and kind of talking about some of these teams that are coming out to really save their season. We'll talk about a couple of teams that kept their season alive, some people that stumbled coming out of the gate last week and could potentially really pay for it throughout the month of December. So I love the holiday season, man. It's such a good time for football and even college football. It's fun because you get towards the college football playoff and some of those conference championship games. But especially for the NFL, man, like holidays are a great time for sports. It really is. It's a good time. And, some of these matchups that we're getting this week are going to be fun. Niners, Dolphins, that's going to be a really, really fun one to watch. Another one I'm interested to see is out in the AFC West, Raiders and Chargers. That's really interesting because, Denver's one of those teams that has continued to just decline, get worse. But the Raiders, they're more competitive. They look a little better. They just have had issues closing out games. But I don't think they have much of a chance because the AFC has so many good teams. But they're sitting there at 4-7. If they get a win against the Chargers, they're sitting there at 5-7. I mean, they've got a legitimate shot to go on some sort of run down the stretch. So for some of these teams, it's a really, really pivotal week to see if they can truly keep their season alive. Yeah, you may have a 1 to 3% chance if something doesn't break the way of a team like Las Vegas. But this week, this win is huge for just keeping realistic hopes alive. Whereas on the flip side of that, someone like the Chargers, man, sitting at 6-5, as competitive as the AFC has turned, and to go back-to-back seasons with the talent that they have with a young Justin Herbert still on, they still have a good deal with him, and to potentially miss the playoffs again, I think could be potentially catastrophic for that organization because they have had a really, really good setup. And it's hard to know if they kind of start to tear some things down in the offseason, if they falter throughout December and January like they did last year and miss the playoffs again. So, that's just one matchup I look at and I go, okay, that's huge for the month of December. Like you look at now, 25 days of Christmas, where are those teams at 25 days from now, right? And that's just one of many matchups that is going to be fun to watch this weekend, is fun to discuss. And really all month we get something like that every single week because this playoff race is just going to be interchangeable. So I don't know if you got a matchup to watch, but yeah, man, it's a great time to be gearing up for the holidays here.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I mean, it certainly is the best time of the year. And I think for me, the 49ers Dolphins. So to get into something we'll probably get into is who my top 5 teams are right now. And the 49ers kind of fell on the bubble of that. They fell in at 6, actually. and the Dolphins were 5. So that is a huge matchup this week. I think that the Dolphins have been undefeated without Tua starting, so they went 3-0 to start. Tua dropped out with the concussion stuff. They went 3-3, and then the last 5 they've won. So we'll see if he can keep it up. That offense, as we've said all year, is extremely explosive, but they run into a brick wall and probably the top 3 defense in the NFL. So that'll be a really interesting one, a good test for the Dolphins and the 49ers to see what they're really made of. I'm really looking at my matchup of the week is the Chiefs and the Bengals. So the Bengals are a team that we've talked about more so in the beginning of the year, and they kind of fell off of our conversation a little bit in the middle. But I did say a couple weeks ago, I think 6 weeks ago, that they had a little bit of a 6-game stretch that I thought that they could make a little run. Unfortunately, Jamar Chase went down for a couple of those games, but the Bengals really stepped up. They won 5 out of those 6 games. They're sitting at 7-4 right now, and they're tied for the division with the Baltimore Ravens, who are actually really struggling. So we've said it all year. The Ravens just have not shown enough consistency to continue to win, and they've had too many close games where they just let slip through their fingers, and the Bengals have taken advantage of that. And I think that's a legitimate opportunity for them to win the division. So we'll see the AFC Championship from last year, Chiefs-Bengals rematch this Sunday. So Jamar Chase will be back too, which is big for the Bengals and makes that game even more explosive. So that's my game of the week. I'm really excited, and I love that it's in the 4:00 window because that's like the lull hour for me. Like I'm kind of exhausted after the Jets game or the other 1:00 games, and I don't really want to see like an NFC East matchup or whatever it is, like NFC West, whatever it is. That to me, like that's a really good AFC matchup, potential playoff challenge, and so that's my game of the week. But there's definitely a couple others that are really exciting.
Yeah, the 4:00 window is finally going to be a good one this week. I mean, the 4:00 window really all season has been horrendous. So we finally get a good one this week. You got Dolphins Niners at 4:05, and you got Chiefs Bengals, Chargers Raiders at 4:25. I think those are all great games for the 4:00 window. You even got Seattle and LA. The Rams are out of it. I think Stafford's out again this week, but Seattle trying to keep their playoff hopes alive after losing to the Raiders last week. So definitely a good window there with those 4:00 games. It's about time. Sometimes I wonder what the NFL is doing. Some of the scheduling. Love that 1:00 window. Then at 4, it's like, all right, I'm too toast for like 2 games. So yeah. Should be a fun one this Sunday. That's for sure. Let's talk about Niners and Dolphins. So this is really 2 teams that we would consider our in our top 6. We put out our top 5 this week, and the Dolphins were in it, and we left out the 49ers. I know that's a tough one because it's kind of a coin toss. They've just been a little less consistent than the others, but they're really coming on. We know how good they are. We know they've consistently been around the top 5. Certainly in the top 10 in PFF's power rankings. And again, we don't do the power rankings off records or anything. I just say that to say they are a very talented team. That's what that's going to indicate is the teams you see at the top there are not going to be record-based. They're going to be those teams that you can clearly see are very talented across the board in the trenches on the outside. And San Francisco has that. Jimmy G is certainly my concern. I think come playoff time, he's certainly vulnerable. He's interesting to watch. You watching him, you're just like, how does he keep winning? We've talked about that. He just continues to do it. So I'm interested to see how they fare against the Dolphins, who are undefeated with Tua this year. You got Mike McDaniel returning himself to San Francisco. So that's certainly going to be just an interesting storyline going into the game. Found a fun stat that NFL Next Gen Stats put out over the week considering this game, and that is Tua has thrown about 38 completions targeting the intermediate middle third of the field this season. That's 16 more than any other quarterback. The reason that's fairly interesting to note is under Mike McDaniel, Jimmy G led all quarterbacks in that same category last year where they went on that Super Bowl run. Now we're seeing Tua do it, right? The reason that's significant is that is the number one play type, the number one area of the field for expected points added, otherwise known as EPA in the NFL. So that's one indicator of why we're seeing Tua consistently succeed is they are targeting that intermediate middle third of the field, basically that 10 to 19 yard range. It's one of the most valuable areas of the field to target, and it's one that San Francisco defends better than any other team in the league. That's something that even Next Gen Stats noted that Fred Warner was brought in to do, and since he came on board, San Francisco has surrendered the fewest completions to that area of the field. So this week, do we see Tua's weak point? I think it's possible we see his weakness exploited because of how San Francisco is designed, how that defense is designed. It's going to be a very tough test for him. I feel like things have to break a certain way at some point. So I think San Francisco continues to get more consistent. I think they may beat the Dolphins this week, but that's going to be something interesting to note. Can Tua adjust? Can Mike McDaniels adjust? And can they kind of handle that defensive scheme that is designed to shut down what they've done all year? I think if they are able to handle it, that's certainly scary for everyone else the rest of the season. And I think raises their overall ceiling and moves them up in the power rankings, in my personal opinion. So what are your thoughts on this game? It's going to be really just a solid one all around to watch.
Yeah, I don't have much else to add. I think you covered pretty much everything that I'm interested in as well. You kind of see that buzzsaw offense of the Dolphins run into the buzzsaw defense of the Niners, and that's kind of what I mentioned in our intro there for a minute. But the Niners, we touched on them a little bit last week, and I think this is one of those, obviously AFC, NFC, but one of those playoff caliber matchups. So they're not going to see each other unless they both make the Super Bowl. I do believe that the Niners are going to make the Super Bowl out of the NFC. That's my prediction, and I think this is an extremely important test for them. If they can slow down what we have already kind of categorized as the most explosive offense in the NFL, that is a massive win for them. And like you said, they are the best team against what the Dolphins thrive at. So we kind of have to see what Tua is made of. And I think that was the question early on in the year, and he's proven that he is good enough. You know, he's had a really good year. There's no doubting that. But Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle have also made it really easy for him with those short routes, with the speed, that they have. So we'll see if Tua struggles a little bit with the deep ball. So we'll see if he can get over the top against the Niners at all. But yeah, I will agree with you. I will go with the Niners as well. They're home this weekend. Dolphins have a long trip ahead of them out there to San Francisco. So I'll go with the Niners this week. Even though Mike McDaniel may be comfortable in that stadium, I believe the Niners are on the up and up. So I'll take the Niners in a close one, but I think it's going to be a gritty battle. I don't think it's going to be like a high scoring game. I think that the Niners definitely have to keep it to a minimum for them to win, I believe. Even though you look at the Niners offense, they have talent all over the field, but like you said, they can only go as far as Jimmy G brings them, and we have to see how far he can bring them. And that was our question early on in the year, and why they may have brought in Trey Lance was because they believed that Trey Lance was going to elevate that offense. And my rebuttal to that was Jimmy G got them there last year. He got them, one game or one score away from the Super Bowl, and if you get to the Super Bowl, you never know what's going to happen. So I do believe Jimmy G is the guy for them, at least right now, with the talent on that team. And unfortunately, due to injury, that's what we've seen. And it's worked out for them to this point. But I believe that they are a legitimate team. I believe the Dolphins are legitimate as well. That's actually a huge – if the Dolphins lose, that is a massive loss for them, for the AFC East standings. So if the Bills win tonight especially too, the Bills would take the 1 seed and the Dolphins would drop to 2. But it is a big weekend. The more I'm looking at this, the more we're talking about it. This is a big weekend for sports, for NFL and for division battles, because there's a lot of up in the air stuff going on this weekend that I think could be settled. Not necessarily all settled this weekend, but there could be a little bit of separation created throughout these games, more than people realize.
Yeah, I agree there. And to your point about Miami, I mean, if they lose this and the Bills win, Miami drops to the 5th seed in the AFC, and that's not even factoring in Cincinnati and New York potentially winning their games as well. So I think it's pivotal because we've talked about how tough that AFC East is. Speaking of the difficulties of that AFC East, your Jets got to eke out another win. Hopefully the Bills can fend off the Pats and help them out some, but right on their heels are teams like the Chargers. So let's kind of shift our focus towards some of these teams that are just outside of the playoff hunt. Won't dive into the Chargers too much beyond what I did earlier, unless you have any further thoughts on them. But let's kind of jump over to the NFC real quick and kind of talk about Seattle, New York, Washington. You look at that 5 through 8, I would say 6 through 8 or 9 in the NFC, and it is dramatically worse, in my opinion, than 6 through 9 in the AFC. So what team do you think is going to make a run? We're seeing New York falter for a number of reasons. They've had an incredible season. We've given a ton of compliments to them. Who's going to catch up eventually. They've had an inordinate amount of injuries that have also made it very difficult on them. I think it's going to be tough for them to have things break their way, and they have one of the most difficult remaining schedules. So I do think the Giants kind of continue to falter, but they certainly have bright things ahead with Brian Daboll. Now, in the NFC, you agree or disagree on the Giants? Who do you think can potentially make a run over there? Because outside of Seattle, you're kind of looking at a couple teams such as, who do we got here? Such as Atlanta, Detroit, Green Bay, Carolina, Arizona, New Orleans, all at 4-8 or 5-7. And they're kind of holding down that 9 through 14 position there in the NFC, which is just a giant mess. On the AFC side, you got, on the bubble here with the patch Chargers sitting there at 6-5. You got Jets, Bengals at 7-4 just in. So I think that's dramatically different on the NFC side as to what can take place moving forward. Give me your thoughts on that race.
Oh God, dude,
it hurts.
It really does. It really does. And look, I know if you're a regular listener, you know that I'm a Jets fan. It's hard to watch how hard that the Jets and other teams in the AFC, even like the Bengals and the Ravens at 7-4, are like fighting for their lives for a playoff spot. And then you look over at the NFC and you're like, oh, the Lions are 4-8 and they have a legit shot to make a run and get a playoff spot. And we're like, well, why can't we have that same shot? Obviously, that doesn't work that way. You don't take the top however many teams make the playoffs by record. Doesn't matter what the conference that you are in. That's not how it works. It would be nice this year, especially, but that's actually my team that I think is going to make a little bit of a run in the NFC. I think that the Lions are they have a pretty favorable schedule for the rest of the year. They got the Jaguars this week, which I think is very winnable. You got the Lions, a division game, but we've already seen the Lions and the Vikings battle it out. Did I just say the Lions play the Lions? The Lions play the Vikings. The Lions and the Vikings already battled it out earlier this year. The Vikings got a 4-point win, but the Lions look good, man. I really do think that they look good. They barely lost to the Bills last week. They beat the Giants up the week before. I think they're getting some wins under their belts. The losses they have really aren't that bad outside the Cowboys loss. Every other game has been pretty darn close. So I think the Lions have a shot to make a little bit of a run. I don't know if they're obviously not going to win that division. The Vikings are 9-2, but I think they can make a wild card appearance in the NFC. But at the same time, other stuff has to happen, such as the Giants and the Commanders have to drop some games. It sounds bad, but I would be kind of sick if the Giants and the Commanders made the playoffs because I just don't think they're good. I think they had, like you said, they had a heck of a year. They were really fun to follow, particularly the Giants, but I just don't think that they're good. I think they're going to get to the playoffs and they're going to run into an absolute wall, whoever they play in the first round, and I think it's going to be ugly. And I know Giants fans have all the confidence in the world that they can beat anybody on their schedule, but I don't know if they even believe that. I think they're just trying to be confident. I do think they have a bright future, like they said. I think they have the right GM, the right head coach. They made Daniel Jones look a heck of a lot better than any of us thought he was this year. They have some tough decisions to make this offseason, but I think they are going in the right direction. That NFC East, like the Cowboys and the Eagles are for me, the two best teams in the NFC. And then the Giants and Commanders are one game behind the Cowboys, and I don't think they're anywhere close to as good. Like I think there's multiple tiers between the Cowboys and the Giants and the Commanders, yet they're only one game apart because of the strength of schedule earlier in the year. And they're kind of running into that difficulty now, as you said, like going towards the end of the year, their strength of schedule gets significantly harder. So we're seeing them drop a couple games. We're seeing some flaws in that team, and Giants drop the last two. The Commanders win their last three. So it's like now we're starting to see a little bit of a shift, and we'll see if it follows through. But I do think that if they make the playoffs, they're going to run into an absolute wall. And I think other teams are better in the NFC. Like I think the Lions are better, to be honest with you. I think they're better than both of the Giants and the Commanders. From what I've seen, I think they're more exciting. They're better. They're more consistent. But one team that I have kind of been on the whole year that I think we've touched on the last week or two about how they can make a significant run in the playoffs if they figure it out is the Bucs. Even though they lost last week, like I do think they're going to win that division. I think they're going to get in, and I think once Brady gets into the playoffs, that's the last guy you want to see, regardless of their record, regardless of where they're playing. That's the last guy you want to see on the opposite side of the field when you get into the playoffs, and they're getting healthy again too. Like Godwin had a huge week last week, back from injury finally, and that offense is really good. Like when they're clicking, they're really good, and that defense, when they're clicking, they're really good. So we'll see what they can do. I don't love Todd Bowles as a head coach. Like I think he's better defensive coordinator than he is a head coach, but I do think it doesn't matter as much when you have a guy like Brady kind of running the show. So those are my call outs for the NFC. It's a lot less fun to talk about for me than the AFC, because I think the AFC is just so much more talented. Like you said, I think they're significantly better. 1 through 8, like Chiefs and Bills, I think are way better than even the Cowboys and the Eagles. So, I think what you said last week, that an NFC team could win the Super Bowl, I agree with. But I also think that the AFC, there's much more talent, much more difficulty to make that Super Bowl. And I think you agree with that. So that's kind of my breakdown of the NFC. Don't love those teams, though, outside of the 49ers, who I do actually like.
Yeah, I mean, you look at, to your point about that on the NFC, there's really only about 3 teams that we've talked about can make the Super Bowl. Whereas in the AFC, it's incredible what your Jets have done, but with it being a quarterback-driven league, I think they're the only one. Well, Tennessee, I don't think Tennessee will. So I think 5 of those teams right there could make a run to the Super Bowl. But the scary part about the AFC is you could actually see a couple of those teams on the outside looking in, making a legit run because of who they have at quarterback, right? You could see them making some type of legitimate run and getting hot at the right time, whereas that's just not present in the NFC. It really is like 3 teams that could make an actual run, and that goes from like top to bottom. Whereas in the AFC, a couple of these teams get hot enough and sneak in, you could have, 5, 6, 7 of the teams that are in the playoffs that are good enough to make a run to the Super Bowl. So that is what makes it so much more fun to talk about. I don't really disagree with much of what you said. I do think it's going to be interesting to see what happens in Washington, New York this week. That's going to potentially be a big decider on Seattle's season the rest of the way, and some of those teams that are following suit. I do think the Lions, you didn't even mention the Falcons. I don't blame you. I just wanted to talk about how much I despise their offense and the fact that they're even in the playoff hunt at this point. That division is just terrible. The Falcons being at 5-7, there's a reason they're barely talked about. They're probably, their 5-7 is not good, and I think they're more of like a 3-8 team, 3-8, 3-9 type of team. I think they're fortunate to be 5-7, so I think they can easily be surpassed, but they do find a way to grind out some wins, and they may end up sitting there at around 8 wins by the end of the season and still in the hunt. I did at least want to mention them, but I also want to say, they're not a threat at all. Detroit, third easiest remaining schedule. Like I said, I think they could certainly get hot. It's hard to trust Jared Goff, but they could get hot. We've talked endlessly about the Bucs. I've talked about them a ton. They defensively are doing really well. Like I said, they're getting healthy at the right time. They've got an easy path to the playoffs. Going to have a home game, can get hot, and then they just falter last week. So they just got to get consistent. They've got to get consistent, and they got plenty of time to be able to do that. So it's kind of like a prove it type of thing at this point, but they'll be sitting there in the playoffs. As for the AFC, so I mentioned the Chargers. Do you think they can make a legitimate run to get into the playoffs? Do you think they're going to be able to pull it off? Because it's going to be tough. I think the Raiders could potentially beat them this weekend.
Yeah, it is going to be extremely tough. Their next 3 matchups are not fun. You got a division matchup with the Raiders. Then you have to play the Dolphins. And if the Dolphins drop one this week to the Niners, they're going to be coming out firing next week against the Chargers. And that's a Sunday night game. So, those guys are going to get up for that one. And then you got the Titans, who we have talked about time and time again that we just don't think that they're a deep playoff contender. But you have to respect what they've done to this point, at least, and they're no pushover when you talk about the Chargers. So yeah, in an AFC playoff race that's as tight as it is for the wild card, particularly, it is not going to be easy for the Chargers. I absolutely think that they can beat the Raiders, beat the Dolphins, beat the Titans, and their last 3 are not difficult. I mean, they got the Colts, Rams, and the Broncos, the Rams and the Broncos are in the last place in their divisions, and the Colts I don't think are great. You just never know what you're going to get out of the Colts. But they're going to have to win probably, at least 5 of the last 6, maybe. Mm-hmm. I mean, depending on whatever everyone else does in the AFC. But that wild card race in the AFC is just ridiculous. So you have to bring your A game every week, and if they drop to the Raiders this week, it might be over for the Chargers.
And you have Watson returning this week as well. I think after a couple years off, he's going to have to knock off some rust. But they're playing a couple teams. They got the Texans this week, then they got the Bengals, Ravens, 2 teams right there vying for the AFC North title that could potentially be knocked off by a Browns team that is always very competitive. I think Stefanski really coaches them well. By no means do I think they're going to make a run or make the playoffs, but I do think that they could certainly destroy some people's seasons down the stretch, namely either Cincinnati or Baltimore's. I think that AFC North division title is going to be crucial. Baltimore fumbled the bag by blowing that lead against Jacksonville and losing the game, and now they're right there neck and neck. They currently hold the tiebreaker over Cincinnati, both of them with identical records. That's going to be crucial, in my opinion, to what happens come playoff time. So between Cincinnati and Baltimore, where do you kind of see that positioning throughout the month of December? Are you thinking that Cincinnati runs away with that division? Baltimore seemed to get very consistent, and then all of a sudden they just kind of fumbled the bag, man.
Man, and we've said it so many times that just they're so inconsistent, the Ravens, and you want
it's actually maddening.
It is, because they should be in the Super Bowl conversation. Yet we don't even know if they're going to make the playoffs because of how crazy the AFC is. You can't drop a game like that to the Jaguars. That's huge. And you know how big of a fan I am. I don't even want to say fan, but like I've been a big believer in the Bengals all year. Since day one, I said they're going to make the playoffs. I believe that they're primed to make another run. They should be better than they were last year. And I think they're kind of heating up again. So I think this week is huge for the Bengals versus the Chiefs. But the rest of their schedule is not easy by any means. They got the Chiefs, the Browns, the Bucks, the Patriots, the Bills, and the Ravens. That's a lot of AFC teams and a lot of teams. The Patriots, Bills, and Ravens are all in the playoff hunt. Chiefs are definitely in the playoffs already, but that's a brutal schedule for the remainder of the year for the Bengals. That's the only reason I feel like the Ravens could sneak it out and win the division, but I do believe in the Bengals. I do believe they're going to make the playoffs. I'm going to stick to it regardless of their schedule. I think they're too competitive. I think Burrow is an absolute gamer, and I can't get on board with the Ravens anymore. And I think a lot of Ravens fans are having trouble doing it as well. Like, as much as they want to be confident in them, we've just seen so many lapses, so many issues throughout the year, and so many, shortfalls of just winning games that they should absolutely win. I mean, what are they, 7-4? They should probably be 10-1. Like, they lost 3 games that were extremely close and were super winnable. So 10-1, you're the best record in the AFC. That's a whole different conversation now. You're talking probably the Super Bowl favorite if you're 10-1. So yeah, I can't go with the Ravens. I'm going to go with the Bengals for the AFC North and the playoff spot.
I'm going to stick to my preseason pick of the Bengals. And you kind of gave the reasoning for it throughout your discussion, but it's, they're tough to trust, man. They are so tough to trust. I mean, for a while, the Bengals organization was the most difficult to trust, but we'll kind of close out the show with this, man. Bengals with the most difficult remaining schedule. You rattled it off, and they actually are. They actually do have the number one most difficult remaining schedule. And I'm going to kind of rattle off the top 5 or 6 for you here. I'm going to go to number 6 because of the playoff implications. But you got Bengals, Patriots. So you may see. I think we're going to see the AFC East shake out. This is most difficult remaining schedules. Keep that in mind. The Broncos, Broncos have had the second easiest schedule to date. I mean, we barely talked about them. It's so
we talked about them early.
Yeah,
and we were sure I was sure that they were going to make the playoffs, and they're looking to be one of the worst teams in the league. It's bizarre, but continue.
The majority of people thought that, and now everything's coming out. Russ is getting slammed and stuff. It's ugly, man, but it's only going to get uglier for them unless they really turn some things around. Miami with the 4th most difficult schedule. So you got 2 of those AFC East teams, the Pats and the Dolphins, there with the number 2 and 4 most difficult remaining schedules. Texans there, they're locking up that number 1 pick. I can tell you that. Giants at number 6. That's another reason why we think the Giants may falter. They've not had a lot break their way. They're slowly getting healthier, but they've overperformed. Ton of injuries. The schedule is going to get much more difficult. Kudos to them for capitalizing thus far. But that's where we're going to see the playoff race shake out. I think it's possible to see the Pats kind of fall off. You may see Buffalo kind of run away with the division because of how difficult Miami's schedule is the remainder of the way. Miami may end up with 11 or 12 wins and finish a game behind Buffalo just because of how things shape out. So that's going to be something to watch. I'll rattle off the easiest schedules for you remaining, not the most easiest, just the easiest. Shout out my English teacher in elementary school, right? Don't throw those two together. Minnesota, LA, Detroit, Kansas City, Green Bay, and then Tennessee at number 6 as well. So those are the easiest remaining schedules. Minnesota really going to have a shot to go for that number 1 overall seed, giving the simplicity of their schedule. Rams season is done. Lions, a team we think can make a run. Kansas City had one of the most difficult schedules. I think they had the 2nd or 3rd most difficult schedule entering the season. 4th easiest remaining. They've gotten through the most difficult part of their schedule. I think after they get by the Bengals this week, that'll be passed. So Kansas City withstood the test of time. Pat Mahomes withstood the test that they were faced. There were talks about them struggling to make the playoffs this season, and here they are with the number 1 seed. So a lot to talk about throughout the month of December. That's what the playoff picture looks like. Those are some schedules where we could really see things shift for the remainder of the season. We'll see what teams go on a run. But, man, as always, I've enjoyed it. You got any final thoughts for our listeners?
The Vikings may have one of the easier schedules this week. Not this week. This year. But they will struggle this week against the Jets. Final thought.
Are you calling a win?
Jets, W. AFC East is going to be shaken up. Dolphins are going to drop to the Niners. Patriots are about to lose tonight. Jets will be in this, I guess they'll be in the 2 spot, right? Because they have the tiebreaker over the Dolphins right now. So AFC East could get wild this weekend. That's all I'm going to say.
Zach Wilson buried 6 feet under.
Yeah,
in the Meadowlands.
Keep Mike White going, man. That guy looked awesome last week in a rain game. But we'll leave it at that. A lot of exciting football. There's really good games this weekend, particularly in that 4 o'clock window. So really excited to see what happens, and a lot of AFC potential shakeups this weekend. So interesting to see.
Yep, I think we're going to see a lot of movement. Could look very different this time next week when we're talking. But for now, enjoy week 13. Everyone else, thanks for tuning in. You know where you can find us at rosterupmedia.com and at rosterupmedia on all social handles. You can find me at Cody Engel, and you can find him at RobMcW24. Thanks for tuning in, everybody.